Well, good morning. Welcome to Eggs and Issues for this little bit chillier Saturday morning. Today we have the state legislators here in the office for your knowledge. So we'll be having them here on pretty quick. I want to make sure that we give a thank to a few people. We're here in our office, KIC Oskaloosa News office inside of the Penn Central Mall, and I'd really like to give those guys some kudos for all of the help that they have been in making this happen. I'd like to give a shout out to Andy and Allison McGuire. They're back helping sort all these questions that you folks will hopefully be sending in. And then we'd like to thank Midwest One and Smoky Row for the coffee this morning. It's nice to have that smell of coffee back in the studio. Hopefully next year things will be better and we can be back in the friendly confines with 100 of our closest friends at Smoky Row. So today we're broadcasting on the Mahaska Chamber Development Facebook page, MCG Channel 7, and here on the Oskaloosa News Facebook page. Once again, you're encouraged to submit your questions to the Chamber's Facebook page, to here to Oskaloosa News' Facebook page during the broadcast, and we'll attempt to have as many of those questions answered as possible. So I'm going to send this over to the legislators, and they'll do a quick introduction and maybe talk about what's currently going on.
Thanks, Ken. For all those who don't know, my name is Dustin Height. I am in the Iowa House of Representatives, represent District 79, which is basically western Mahaska County and Pella, including all of Oskaloosa and University Park. This is my second term in the Iowa legislature, and this year I serve on Ways and Means again, Judiciary, a brand new committee, the Information Technology Committee, where we tackle issues such as technology and broadband and those sorts of things. And then this year I'm also assuming a new role as chair of the Education Committee in the House of Representatives. So we're in the second week of the legislature, and so we've started off on a fairly quick start, I think. So.
And I'm Holly Brink. I represent District 80, which is the east side of Mahaska County. I wrap around on the north, the west, and a little bit on the south of Wapello County. I also have Monroe and Appanoose. Some of my roles have changed this year. I'm on education. I am on the IT committee. I'm on appropriations, as well as I am chairing government oversight this year. It has been a quick start, but looking forward to everything that's going to happen over the next few months.
Well, good morning, Ken and Ginger. Good morning to the audience. State Senator Ken Rosenbaum, beginning my 9th year in the Iowa Senate, representing District 40, which is the same geography as Representative Height and Representative Brink have. So those two are both in my Senate district. I am on a lot of the same committees I've been on for many years. I'm on Appropriations, Agriculture, Education, and this year I picked up Transportation and gave up the State Government Committee, so I did have a change there. I've always been on the Natural Resources and Environment Committee, still remain on that. The last 4 years I chaired it. I am no longer the chair of that. Instead, I'm chairing the Ag and Natural Resources Budget Subcommittee. The others didn't mention it, but it's very different at the Capitol this year because of the pandemic. All of our procedures are different, and maybe we could get into some details of that if there are questions, but I think what the public needs to know is that while it's different, it's very, very much transparent. It's the heart of our system of government that the public is at the table for all discussions and all decisions. And that remains true. We do the Senate subcommittees via Zoom, so actually more people than ever can participate in those subcommittee hearings if they're interested in a particular bill. All of our committee meetings are held in the Senate chamber itself rather than in a separate room, and that is always constantly live streamed on the legislative website. So while it's different, it's very much government of the people, by the people, and for the people. I should mention one other thing, I guess. if you log in and you see that the Senate chamber looks almost empty, it's because it is. We don't have any clerks in there. We have only minimal staff. And a lot of senators, unless they have to be at a committee meeting, are not on the floor. They are doing their work remotely, so it's quite an empty chamber sometimes. With that, I guess we'll take your questions.
Ken, I want to add something too, just for those out there. The Capitol is still open to the public. Anybody can come just as they have before. But as Ken said, we're live streaming a lot of stuff now, so you can view committee meetings, subcommittee meetings from home, where otherwise maybe in the past you weren't able to.
Alrighty. Well, we'll get to one of the first questions that we have is from Allison McGuire. Can you catch us up on your work since the 2020 session adjourned on June 14th?
On our work since June 14, well, that's the interim. And most interims are, for most of us, catching up with our main livelihood and family activities. For me and my wife, that's working on our little farm and cutting a lot of trees and brush. But one thing you might be interested to know is that while we may be in the interim, we get emails every day related to our work in the legislature. And of course, not all of those need a response right away, but some do. So constituent work is very much a part of this job. The session is the visible part. The less visible part is the fact that we have constituents that have questions or problems or concerns, and either by phone or by email or even in-person visits, we regularly deal with matters such as that. And then as we get nearer the session, a lot of people want to talk to us. They have ideas they'd like to share with us, maybe suggestions on legislation. So as we get into November and December, there's a lot of work on that, and each of us is working on our own set of priorities. So I'll let the others embellish how they wish to do that question.
Since session, we shut down, of course, in March, and then through April and May, I, like several other parents out there, was homeschooling, I'll say, or working with online learning with my children, and trying to stay on top of legislature, everything going on. After we finished in June, I kind of continued going back, of course, to my career with AFLAC, but working at least 1 to 2 days a week on constituent issues, traveling through the district, actually traveling to other districts, learning what they're doing there, and starting to kind of create the priorities for this next session that we're now in. Meeting with different organizations such as childcare, met with several teachers, met with several different businesses, just trying to gather the knowledge that was needed to make sure we do what's best for Iowans and help move it forward.
So, like these two, I've got a career outside of the legislature, and so you go back to work is kind of what a lot of people do. But on top of all that, one thing that these two did not mention that we all do every 2 years, or at least some of us do every 2 years, Ken, some of you only have to do it every 4, is campaigning. We, all three of us, were up for re-election this year, and so that takes up quite a bit of time. Holly and I did not have an opponent, but we worked throughout our district and throughout the state to help other people get elected. But I assume that Allison was really getting to, what do you do in the off season as it pertains to the legislature? So in addition to campaigning, it's just what these two said. You work on priorities, you meet with groups, you meet with different organizations, schools, colleges, different business groups, all of that. And so you spend a lot of time doing that in addition to working on your own priorities. For me, the other thing that I did after the election when I was named chair of the education department is to try to get up to speed on education in the state of Iowa. Not having served on that committee before, it became incumbent upon me to really dive into the details of education. And so I spent a lot of the month of December doing that.
Love technology. All righty. So we had a question that came in. I'm looking at the Facebook page here, and I noticed that we had a question come in that says, "Can we vote on going back to no more daylight savings time?" So that's one of the questions that came in. So daylight savings time is rough.
Well, I haven't seen a bill this year. There may be one out there that sometimes people do submit a bill to deal with that. I've never seen it go anywhere, and same may be true this year. But it's a good opportunity maybe to mention it's that time of year, this first 2 weeks and the next couple of weeks going forward. It's a time of the year that we get a set of bills dropped on our desk every day that people are submitting. So this part of the session, I think we're all busy scanning the various bills. There will be several hundred filed, I'm sure, in the first few weeks, and many will not see the light of day, but it's our job to kind of keep up with what's going on and see what's coming down that we may be called on to debate and vote on. So that's just not one of them yet.
And that just kind of brought up a good point. For a lot of people, you might hear about a bill or get a little bit of uproar about something. I think it was a couple of years ago. There's a little over 2,100 bills that were introduced, and 174 of them got signed. So a lot of them either get condensed and combined or worked through, or they're not going to go anywhere. But just because there is something that's introduced does not mean that it's going to be moving forward. And so I always tell people to make sure that you get on that website if you are concerned about one and watch it. Because I think it's really interesting to see how many really don't go anywhere or get worked through or combined together. So.
And to answer the question on our side of the rotunda, I have not seen the annual get rid of daylight savings time or just go to daylight savings time bill. I think there's a variation of that every year. Haven't seen that yet. And the more I go on and the more I hear from constituents, I become more and more open to actually considering voting for that. And maybe the time has come that we are no longer need that. But haven't seen that bill dropped yet. And if it does and it makes its way through, then certainly I will consider it.
All righty. We have a question from Mr. Kent, and it says, are you going to work on a bill to standardize how many acres are required to be considered an agricultural plot of land? I think this is for Mr. Roseman mostly. For the average person, most assessors use 10 acres before considering a parcel of land agriculture, whereas factory hog lots only require 2 acres to be viewed as an agricultural parcel. So I believe that's for Mr. Roseman.
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question. I guess I don't know. There's different definitions probably for the same thing depending on whether it's a local or a state or a federal matter, I suppose. For an example would be the Forest Reserve program, which I have worked on a lot, and I'm working on this year. There's a 2-acre minimum required to put land in a forest preserve. And by the way, I'm suggesting that should be raised to either 5 acres or 10 acres. But my point is, we can't mix and match different concepts and different levels of government to determine what is or is not an agricultural enterprise, I think, because agricultural enterprises also vary depending on whether you're ranching 100,000 acres in the West, or you're growing corn on 1,000 acres in Iowa, or you're raising hogs in a confinement building in Pennsylvania. So I think that there's probably a lot of different levels and enterprises that need to be considered. And I'm not sure what the question's driving at, but hopefully that clarified a little.
I'll answer this even though it may not have been directed at me. I've not heard any of my assessors tell me that they have a challenge in classifying agricultural real estate for tax purposes, so I don't know that there's really a problem with that. And I would also question the term factory hog lot. I've never seen one of those. I've seen family hog operations and other hog operations throughout Mahaska County that contribute to our economy. But as far as the acreage, again, that's never an issue that I've heard that's a problem.
All right, and we have another one here. It says, this one's from the Exchange in Oskaloosa. So, is there any type of public participation, questions, comments allowed or available that are available during live streaming of committees and subcommittees? So,
You can always put your comments in, but it is not where they can communicate back and forth and talk. If you're in the room, you can talk and personally ask questions, but you are allowed. Okay, but you are allowed to submit your questions online, and then the subcommittee chair can see them. And it's nice you can even put them ahead of time, but you can watch live, but enter your questions.
Yeah, and I want to, just by way of explanation, typically, in most years, other than this year, a subcommittee meeting is generally attended by mostly the lobbyist groups that represent the different points of view on a given issue. So if it's education related, we'll have the State Teachers Association, we'll have the Iowa Association of School Boards, we'll have all those entities that are interested in education questions around the room. And at that time, they're allowed to ask questions, to make comments, to state their case, why a bill is good or bad. And also the public can attend those. Now, typically, there are not a lot of general public there. It's primarily the work of the lobbyists. But I've also gone to subcommittee meetings that are absolutely packed. I've seen probably 300 people at a subcommittee meeting before. In a room that would only hold maybe 100. So this year it's different, it's electronic, and the lobbyists that represent their different clients will be present at that via Zoom, and they will be recognized, given an opportunity to speak. So the process is the same that way as it's been before, and it can be observed by many, many more people.
I guess I would add one thing and point out one thing. I think for me at least, and I believe probably the same for these two, the most effective form of communication is directly from a constituent. Email seems to be the preferred method pre or post pandemic, but that's the most effective communication for me, since of course constituents, those are the people that I represent.
all righty. Well, we've gotten a question here from Jennifer Keogh. The governor has proposed lowering state income tax and adding a sales tax. Do you support, and how do you justify shifting the tax burden this way?
Well, the governor has not submitted that bill. That sounds like the Invest in Iowa program that we had, that the governor submitted last year. She chose not to resubmit that same tax bill this year. She has talked about reducing the income tax, so we'll have that discussion.
Alrighty. I'm going to search Facebook for a couple of questions here. Let me switch this over here so you can see me. And all right. So I'm looking at Facebook here, and we have Kevin Tacky. He's asking a question. He goes, can the requirements for employers to withdraw state income tax for employees be removed? So I'll repeat it again. It says, can the requirement for employers to withdraw state income tax for employees be removed?
So I think Kevin is probably talking about mandatory withholding. I think probably just from a practical standpoint, we probably can't do that. And the reason for that is, for those of us that are self-employed, we have to pay quarterly estimates, or in the case of a farmer, they pay one time a year by March 1st. But we pay quarterly estimates, and I think just from a practical standpoint, many people are not don't want to do that or maybe not plan to do that. And so I think in order for the state to collect the taxes that are due, income withholding is probably the most efficient way. If there's a concern about the particular income withholding, of course, an individual has pretty good flexibility to change that, and in fact, I believe could reduce it down to next to nothing, and then pay quarterly estimates themselves as long as they pay them appropriately and the correct amount throughout the year. They wouldn't owe any penalties or interest. But I think it's just a practical thing.
All right. And we have a question here from Dana Holes, and this is for all three. If the legislature is making adjustments for COVID by not meeting in person, do you think the school employees should be meeting in person?
So the legislature is still in person. So in the House, you have to be there to comment as a legislator, and you have to be there to vote. I think we owe that to our constituents who voted us in the office. I think the studies have shown that transmission of COVID is quite low in the schools, and from what I've heard from parents and from teachers, quite frankly, that everybody prefers to be back in person, or the vast majority of people prefer to be back in person.
Yeah, I'd say I know I'm there every day. I know these two, I've seen them every day. We are back in person. If you come up, you will find us. We are working for you. Our subcommittees, we are sitting there doing the subcommittees, but for those that aren't, able to make it, we are kind of moving up the technology that you can watch. So, but we are there taking votes because you can't vote online, obviously.
Well, and I think this is an opportunity to applaud the schools in my district anyway that have been dealt a tough hand, like we've all been dealt a tough hand, and we've tried to all learn and figure out ways to get our work done, regardless of the nature of that work, with some adjustments, with obviously some handicaps. So you can't apply the same set of rules across the board to every situation. The school environment, of course, is a very different environment than the legislature, and certainly that's different than farmers that are out on their own. But so we've all tried to adjust and adapt, and I think our schools have done a remarkable job. We're all on the education committee, or respective education committees. We are also aware from news reports and from parents that some schools have made in-person learning extremely difficult or non-existent. And as legislators, we have to respond to that, and we will respond to that, because we all know instinctively and from scientific basis that in-person learning is far superior to online, at least for most students.
All right, and we have a question from Brent Stam. I miss seeing you, Brent. So anyway, he's just curious, has there been any work on the bottle bill?
Well, Brent, good morning to you. Yes, there have been a couple of bills submitted in the Senate to this point. I know there's one in the House that's been submitted to just eliminate the bottle bill program. I'm working on a bill myself that is not yet been filed, will be in the next week or two. And I can get into the specifics of that if people want to. But my bill would continue the bottle bill as we know it. It would double the handling fee. It would remove the requirement of retailers to take those receptacles back. And it would also, and we're working out the details on this, require some audit system so that we could track the program better. So that's all I'll say for now, but yes, a lot of work's being done.
Alrighty. Well, we have a question here from Jamie Krause, and she's curious. Could you summarize some of the ways that you have supported child care and early childhood childhood workers this year?
So we have a lot of stuff going on because we understand that childcare workers, it is an essential thing that we need. We have to have those, taking care of the children to help, our workers, our workforce, our businesses grow. This year, I believe there is already 4 bills I know entered into the House, trying to, one, encourage public-private partnerships to invest in more childcare facilities or to help with upgrades. Because Iowa does have that problem, obviously. There's also one dealing with the cliff effect. We're realizing it and talking to some employers that there's individuals that maybe on some child care assistance, but if they get a 50-cent raise, they lose all of their child care assistance. And so they'll actually go in the hole $160 a week. So it's really hard to help them grow. So we're looking at the a cliff effect as well as some different tax entities to help public-private partnerships build facilities, improve facilities, or just encourage those and communities to work together to get that going.
No, I don't have anything.
And to back up on that, Jamie, we passed several things out of the House last year, and I think COVID, as did many bills, didn't make it because of COVID, and I think those were several of them. I believe this year they're all getting funneled through the Human Resources Committee, which I do not sit on. I don't think Holly sits on. And so in all likelihood, those will get worked on, and we will probably see them sometime mid-session.
And we have another one from Brent again. And I'm telling you, on a day that's cold like this, I'm ready for flowers and springtime. So, Brent, take care of us, would you? So his other question is what will be done with the $700 million budget surplus?
Well, let's do a little housekeeping on the number first. The numbers that I've seen, and I didn't bring my budget stuff with me, so if I'm a little off, forgive me. The budget carryover surplus, I think, is projected something like $450 million. And I don't know where the 700 came from. But the governor has submitted a couple of supplemental appropriations for the current current fiscal year, which, if we followed her recommendations, as I recall, would bring that budget surplus down to just under 400 million, 395 million or something like that. So, but then to answer your question, the concept of your question, obviously we have to pass a balanced budget going forward. Those discussions are taking place, certainly by leadership and the appropriations chairs right now. As one question dealt with the governor's tax plan, there is suggestions or thoughts about eliminating the triggers on the tax cut so that we could get that tax cut into place a year earlier. So when we talk about the budget, there's 1,000 pieces to it, and everybody's interested in their piece of it. And that's the process, is putting all that together, and that has begun.
And I just want to add, too, with the pandemic and everything, Iowa was voted #1 to financially withstand the pandemic by a bipartisan organization, Council of Government. I think that's proven to us, the pandemic did prove that we need to make sure that we do have that surplus in place, because everything we did was cash on hand. When we were putting out the first $2 million, and then we did another 24 for economic development and helping our small businesses, that was cash on hand. We're not going to the federal government now begging for money because we overspent. But because of our fiscally conservative budget that we've been putting together, we could help our small businesses and help them immediately and not wait for others to come and save the day for us. And so I think we need to keep that into consideration and make sure we continue to put together fiscally conservative budgets so that we can help in time of need.
So to add to that, much of the surplus, or I shouldn't say much, but some of the surplus every year goes to expenses that exceeded what we would plan for them. And we call those supplements, as Ken talked about. Medicaid is usually a large one, especially this year with just increased costs. And so some of it goes to that. I don't sit on appropriations, so I'm not as familiar with all that. The other thing, and I don't know if this was what Brent was getting to or not, but one thing that I know we've all heard about is spending the cash reserves in the emergency fund. And I think something that taxpayers need to know is, by law, if we spend that fund this year, we then have to pay it back next year. And so essentially we are just kicking the can down the road. We're not using up savings. We are kicking the can down the road. And I think there's a lot of resistance among Republicans in the House and the Senate to do so when we are in a strong financial position to pay those now.
All right. Well, we have a question from Corey Trainer here, and this is for all three. So, all three of you sit on education committees. For each of you, why do you think 25% fewer college students go into teaching today compared to 5 years ago? That figure is according to the Iowa Department of Educator 2019 report on state of educator preparation.
So Ken, that's one of the biggest questions that I ask teachers every time we talk about a teacher shortage. The very first question I always ask anybody talking about a teacher shortage or any career shortage for that matter is this above and beyond what we see across Iowa, which is a general worker shortage? We don't have electricians, we don't have enough plumbers, we don't have enough doctors, nurses, you name it. We simply don't have enough workers. That's a problem across Iowa. Every time I ask that, of whether it's of teacher groups, school groups, college groups, usually I get the answer is I don't know. And so I think that's probably the first part where we need to look at is this over and above beyond just the general worker shortage that we have in Iowa. If it is, one of my thoughts and one of the things that I've heard from teachers and why this may not be as attractive a position as it was in the past is the increased load that we put on teachers, the increased paperwork we ask them to do, the increased meetings and all that kind of stuff, which takes them outside of what they really want to do is teach. And so I've told all those groups that I'm certainly willing to look at that and take suggestions on what we can do to address those specific issues, because I think that's probably a big part when I talk to teachers.
And I too agree with the overload of paperwork and stuff. Is when I actually have a secondary education degree, and when I was in that, it was I wanted to be this inspire kids and things like that, and it's really hard to do with some of the mandates that are in place. So I've been having the same discussions of looking at different things that are going on to try to look at that exact problem and find out. I did not know it was 25%, so thank you, Corey, for letting us know that. So.
Well, the other two have touched on certainly valid points. Yeah, we do deal with shortages in many of the professional areas in Iowa, and teachers is just one of many. To the matter of excessive paperwork, regulation, duties, 3 or 4 years ago, I think it was 3 years ago, we hit that head on because we recognized that as a problem. And Senator Amy Sinclair had a comprehensive bill that many of us supported to do an analysis of what teachers are required to do. And we trimmed that back a lot. Did we trim it enough? No. I think we should and could have done more. But that's constantly under scrutiny to make sure that we're having our teachers teach instead of doing other duties. I think implicit in the question is something probably has to do with, and knowing Corey, probably has something to do with teacher pay. I didn't bring my notes on that with me, so I have to speak in generalities. But in my now 8+ years in the legislature, our pay for Iowa teachers has been more than competitive with surrounding states. As I recall, we have the 8th highest increase of any state in the country over the period of the last 10 or 12 years. And I've looked at those numbers often and every year, and because those are fair considerations for employment for people that are seeking employment. And I feel very comfortable that the index of our cost of living versus teacher pay is very, very adequate and probably well above average.
All right. And I think we have a question from, I think it's Pam Blomgren, if I'm seeing correctly here. So so what is the IT committee's priorities, and since it's a new committee, what is its purpose?
So the IT committee, we realized last year, in-house especially, that there's a lot of stuff we need. We have broadband issues. Obviously here in Oskaloosa, we are very blessed. But there's a lot of smaller communities and throughout the state that are really struggling. And during the pandemic, we even realized it more with kids that the online learning and trying to take tests online and things like that. So we have a lot of issues with not only broadband, but just in storage in general. Just technology as a whole for the state, such as some of you guys have heard about just different programs and initiatives of the workday system or storage of our, the cloud, I should say. And so that is mainly, it was just formed to make sure that we could work together, look at the problems as a whole and address them in one committee versus piecing it out through different committees in the state.
So, and to piggyback on what Holly said, Pam, is it's above and beyond simply broadband. When the speaker created that committee, I know I had conversations with him, and he named it IT for a specific reason, and that is to make sure that we don't simply focus on broadband, that we get to the other issues, including within our own state and within our own state government, and working on what computer systems and what technology is best for the state of Iowa government. But from my perspective on there, I want our priority to be broadband. And I know the chair, Brian Losey, who lives up in Bondurant, one of his things that I know he's told me, and I think he's told everybody, is to try to find those barriers to high-speed internet throughout the state that we can get rid of. And what those are right now, that's what the work of the committee is to try to figure out what those are and then figure out how to remove them.
Well, I'm just going to touch on it in a more general way because at my age, obviously, I look for a grandchild or a page to help me out with technology problems. But I want to mention I think, priorities from the 30,000-foot view in Iowa, and I think most legislators share these priorities. One is, we've touched on broadband. Another one was mentioned earlier, and that's child care. A third one that I will mention is housing needs across the state. And of course, we talked about needing employees, needing workers. So I think those are on the radar of every legislator at one level or another. And depending on our committee assignments, we may or may not be working actively on those right now. But as the session progresses, we will all be dealing with all of those things.
All right. And we have a question from Kurt Keogh. If I've massacred your last name, please forgive me. But what is your opinion on the capital rules about COVID-19? He says, if I understand correctly, masks are optional and members are not expected to notify others if tested positive.
Masks are not mandatory. And use of those varies by individual. I personally do not wear a mask if I'm sitting at my desk where social distancing is certainly adequate. If I go out into the rotunda, into the lobbyist, I generally wear a mask. I always wear a mask. I hedge because sometimes I pull it down to talk to people, as I find most people do. So, and then as far as the question about mandatory reporting, I'm not sure. I guess I don't know of the protocol. Leadership has set rules. I don't know every one of those rules, but given if I discover there's some issue, we know who to talk to.
And I know on the House and the Senate, we kind of do things a little bit differently. But on the House floor, if you log on and watch, I mean, pretty much every single person has a mask on. I don't think you don't have to mandate when it's happening already. Maybe a couple people at their desk, have taken it off or whatever. But I know I choose to wear it all the time, just because I don't want to be quarantined, obviously, because then I'm not there to represent you. So I know I've chosen to wear it on all the time. I don't ever even think I've seen Dustin with his off either. But that's important to me to make sure that I'm there to represent you. So if I wear my mask to make sure that I'm there, representing and working for all of you. Other than that, I don't know necessarily. When the lobbyists come talk, they've all had it on, so that's probably why the mandate maybe hasn't happened, because we're already doing it.
Yeah, and to the point of reporting contact or anything like that, while it's not mandatory, I do believe that it's expected of us, and I certainly intend to follow that, and I would assume that the two up here as well, and quite frankly, the vast, vast, vast majority of our colleagues, if not all.
All right, we've received a question from Irene, and she's curious. With some children having computers at home for school, what is being done for a child that isn't disciplined or can't understand their lessons to do their lessons at home? So I'm assuming this is virtual learning, probably some issues that go along with that. I don't want to speak too much to her question, though.
So I can tell you both in the House and the Senate, there is a bill. They are two different bills at this time, but I'm sure that they will be merged and likely get off both floors this week, that requires schools to offer in-person learning for all students, because I think that's something that we certainly have heard. Now, the districts in the school districts in the districts that we represent have done a great job. They've been in person when they can. They've had to take some breaks occasionally, and that's just part of the deal right now. But they've been in person, and I think, to Irene's point, that's really what we're doing, is we're giving parents the ability to make sure that their kids are in person. Some kids do learn fine online, and for them, parents would still have that option. We also have online accredited schools in the state of Iowa. We've had those for several years, and some students learn best. But again, that's the parent's choice. So I think that is the first and foremost thing that we are doing, is making sure that schools are offering that online option. But again, our schools in our districts have been doing it, and been doing it quite well.
So I've got a question myself here. So as the vaccine's starting to roll out, Phase 1B is going to be getting underway, and there's been some finalizing of the plans for that that's going forward. First responders, so those guys and gals are going to be getting the vaccine here pretty shortly. It's also got the legislators and other city, county government sort of people included in that, along with the age 65. So let's kind of talk about your thoughts about the rollout of Phase 1B, and what kind of priorities that you would like to see in that rollout.
Well, there's been some questions in terms of priority. As I understand it now, 1B will prioritize those 65 and older. And as you said, Ken, first responders and teachers are in there somewhere. There's a whole list of priorities. I am still trying to get clarity on the matter of government workers, because that's a sore spot with some of my constituents. And I yesterday sent an email in, and I still have not received the answer, whether a 45-year-old legislator would have priority over a 68-year-old woman. And because the language I saw, I thought was unclear. So I'm personally waiting for an answer to that question yet. But I think the maybe the more important message is the priorities have been established by the advisory board and with the input of the governor. But sadly, there's not going to be enough vaccine ready soon enough to cover all of those. So it's just a work in progress, and it's frustratingly slow.
Well, I was going to add, Ken, the challenge with this, and I hate to second guess people, because the challenge with this is new to all of us. When we get through this, vaccination process, which I think everybody in this room and probably everybody online hopes is sooner rather than later, we may look back and say, well, maybe we should have put these people ahead of those people and that sort of thing. And so it may not be perfect. I don't disagree with that. I don't know. Again, the people that are making these decisions are doing the best that they can with the information they have.
All right, and we have a question here from Oskaloosa Mayor Dave Kreutzfeld. And he's curious, with less miles being driven and more folks buying hybrid vehicles, there's less gasoline being sold. So less gas tax being collected. Has there been a significant effect on the planned road construction and repair of our highways because of that?
I don't necessarily know if there's, with the planning, but I can tell you the RIF budget has definitely taken a hit this last year, considering most of the money's going to come from casinos and gas tax. So with your casinos basically being 100% shut down, other than a little bit of sports betting on table tennis, I think I found. I don't really think that we were, which didn't bring very much in. It has taken a dramatic hit. And so I'm not on the RIF budget, but I am on appropriations, and we are working through trying to find ways to, stretch the dollars the best we can, have a better understanding. Is there anything we can shift around? So yes, there has been some talk. We don't have a solution yet, but we are absolutely discussing it.
Well, Mayor Dave, unfortunately, with the mask on, you can't see if I'm smiling or not, but I just want to remind you that we raise the gas tax in Iowa once every 40 years, whether we need to or not. Having said that, and you know what I mean, Dave, we raised it in 2015 for those that don't remember. We raised it 10 cents. I am now on the Transportation Committee and have not dealt into that yet, but for the first time in my 9 years, I will be seeing those numbers more directly. Your point's well taken, and it's understood. That was part of the problem with why some of us thought we needed to raise it several years ago. So I think I'm the only one here on Transportation Committee, and I'm new at it. So we'll be taking a look at that.
Well, and just to add to that a little bit, again, nobody likes to raise taxes. Nobody likes to raise fees. Kind of wish Ken would have taken care of that more back in 2015 so that Holly and I didn't. But the other thing with your electric vehicles, I know that we look at is registration fees, since there is no gas tax with that. And so I know that that's something at least that we're consciously aware of, that as our modes of transportation change, we may have to change the way in which we raise funds for that.
Alrighty, so we kind of have a longer question here, and I'm afraid I might going to massacre it, so I dropped this question so Ken Rosenboom could maybe see it ahead of time. So the question is what are your thoughts on SSB 1065? Public schools serve all students equally, and according to Lindsay, this proposal would spend about $50 million to benefit only 10,000 of Iowa's almost 500,000 students. Are you concerned that this bill could lead to the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer?
Well, I will answer that last question directly. No, it does not have anything to do with that, I don't believe. I think what the questioner is referring to, well, I know specifically it's Senate Study Bill 1065, which I am familiar with. It's got 8 divisions. It's rather complicated. But if the listeners would go back and recall the governor's State of the Condition of the State speech, she called for the establishment of some school choice options that don't exist today. And included in that, as I recall, was a request to establish a student-first scholarship, I think she called it, so that kids that are trapped in poor-performing schools have an option to move on to other schools so their children get a better education. As I recall, the governor proposed a $3 million appropriation for that. The questioner mentioned, and I get this in emails, $50 million serving 10,000 students. I do not have a clue where those numbers came from. The governor's rationale was only a small percentage of students will probably take advantage of this program, and that's why she allocated $3 million, or she suggested $3 million, not $50 million. The other, boy, it's a very complicated thing. Another piece of this bill, Senate Study Bill 1065, deals with what in Iowa we know is open enrollment. All the schools in my district use that open enrollment feature for parents that choose to enroll their student in a school other than the one they live in. And but there are 5 or 8 schools in the state that have diversity plans that trump or preempt the open enrollment. And most notably, that's in Des Moines. There is no open enrollment option for Des Moines School District children because the diversity plan preempts that. And this bill eliminates the problem of the diversity plan overriding open enrollment. So that's part of it. It's, as I said, there's 7 or 8 divisions to the bill. The Senate Study Bill 1065 is an attempt to get the discussion started.
So as chair of the Education Committee in the House, I've been privy to a couple of different versions as it's made its way through. I did print off Senate Study Bill 1065 before I came in here. It's 66 pages, and it's still a pretty thick pile of paper, even though I printed it on both sides. As Ken said, it's difficult to discuss the bill as one bill. I think likely in the House we may be tackling each individual division separately because when you put that much in here, it makes it quite cumbersome. For example, one of the things that's in here is an increase in the tuition and tax book credit for parents. Which I personally support. But also, the governor put in here at my request, I was sitting in a meeting in her office with her staff, an increase in the deduction for teachers and the money that they spend on their own classrooms. So, again, it's hard to say yay or nay on the whole bill. There are certainly some things in here that are simple. The diversity plans that Ken was talking about, to me, that's a simple answer. We are running a bill. I'm personally going to floor manage that, and we will be considering that in the full Education Committee on Monday, and I expect it to make its way to the floor fairly quickly, all the way to the ESAs that you were talking about. So it's really difficult to say on just the bill as a whole. If there's questions about the individual sections, I'm happy to talk about those individually. It just makes it a lot easier.
All right. And so I have a question from Angela Benz, and she's curious if there's anything that can be done with the state of Iowa can do to circumvent Mr. Biden's executive order pertaining to allowing boys and girls locker rooms in sports and vice versa.
I will answer this with probably not the answer that she's expecting. I'm not aware of any executive order. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I will tell you generally, we as the state cannot trump the federal government.
All right, and we're down to about 7 minutes left, so we got this one question, and we'll leave with some comments from you guys to close. So this is from Meredith Nunakovan, and she's curious about recycling, particularly within Mahaska County and rural residents of Mahaska County. She's curious about how or what you might be doing to help facilitate recycling, particularly with like rural residents, or because it might be a little less than desirable for some folks here in the county currently.
I'm not exactly aware of anything. We have the bottle bill, that type of stuff we are working on, but as recycling as a whole, I'm not aware of any bills that are being worked on. At least none of it would probably go through any of the committees I'm on at this point either. So I don't.
Well, no. Well, first of all, Meredith, the way you reference a question seems to me some of that's local matters, city, county, and that sort of thing. So we don't try to micromanage that in any way, but I do want to come back to the bottle bill and just say that I'm aware of that. I'm not in favor of eliminating the bottle bill. I'm fully aware that since the bottle bill originally passed, that 5 cents isn't now what it was then. I'm fully aware that we didn't have plastic water bottles to deal with then. But that is frankly why the bill I'm submitting is what it is. I've seen all sorts of complex attempts to change the bottle bill, and they've all failed. So my proposal is very simple, and it's also somewhat incremental in the sense that if we can do this now, if we can make these adjustments now, that deal with the obvious deficiencies of the current bottle bill, then in later years, next year or the year after, we can start to deal with some of these other things, such as raising that nickel to a dime, for instance, if that's what people want. There's also another dynamic at play here that we have to recognize. Whether it's scrap plastic, scrap steel, or aluminum, the salvage value of those products has changed significantly over the last few years. Dynamic shifts in that. And that's part of the equation as well, because the business community will show up when there's opportunity to make money on recycling and that sort of thing. But when the market, the bottom drops out of those markets, those opportunities are lost. And that does impact how people deal with their trash. So a lot of complex factors there. We can specifically talk about the bottle bill, but there's much greater questions than that, but most of those are local, I think.
So I agree with Ken's sentiment that I think that's a decision that's best made on the local basis, or actually in my preference on the consumer basis. I do believe that there are haulers out in Mahaska County, Marion County, that if you want to, you can contract to pick up your recycling. And so I think personally, being a free market person, a government get out of the way kind of person, I think that's the decision best left to the consumer.
Alrighty, and I'm just going to have you guys, if you prefer, just give a closing comment. We have just a few minutes left.
I just want to touch on one thing really quick, which is if those of you, the governor announced her Iowa Restaurant Bar Relief Grant. Make sure that if you are involved in any kind of fast food, casual, ice cream parlors, coffee shops, juice, food trucks, anything like that. She put out $40 million. As we all know, during the pandemic, you guys were the heaviest hit industry. We shut you down quickly. And so she did put out another $40 million. And all you do is to apply starting February 1st. It's your Q2 and Q3 sales tax. You have to verify that, and it shows a 15% decrease to apply. But that starts on February 1st. So make sure you look into the Iowa Restaurant and Bar Relief Grant Program that's been announced.
Well, thank you, and thanks to all the viewers and listeners. I just want to mention a couple things again from the 30,000-foot view. Every year, the legislature's primary responsibility is to pass a balanced budget. We will do that. We will do that with the conservative budgeting practices, the common sense approach we've taken to budgeting the last 4 years. So we will get that done. I think education, the matter of education, will be a large part of the discussion this year. We've talked about some of the K through 12 considerations. All three of us here are aware of what I consider to be very egregious First Amendment problems on our our regent campuses. I think we're all involved in dealing with that at one level or another. And I just want the public to know that we are aware of those abuses, and we are dealing with those abuses as best we can. Aside from that, it's just an honor to serve Senate District 40 again, and I just encourage you to be part of the process in any way you choose, whether that's a phone call or email. As Dustin mentioned, email is really handy. We can, if we don't have answers to questions, we can ship it off to a staffer and let them do some research for us and get answers to you. So I just encourage the public to continue to be part of the process.
And again, yes, thank you for letting me serve you. This start has been, I know, a new challenge for me as being chair of government oversight. we don't necessarily deal with all the policies and issues. We are more looking into what is going on. Senator Rosenboom brought up the First Amendment speech problem, which I have spent hours on. We will be having a hearing next week on it, so I've been doing a ton of prep work for that with some situations that have happened at our regents. And so I know that's what I've spent a ton of my time on, as well as some issues in the education, some economic development as always. But I think the next few weeks are going to be very busy. A lot of stuff's going to come out about it, and I look forward to speaking with you guys in a couple weeks again.
So just to cap off, I agree with Ken and Holly. I think education is going to be a large conversation at the State House this year. I'd like to think that's why the Speaker put me in charge of the Education Committee, that he knew that I was up for the challenge and the work. All of us are up there every day working for our constituents, and normally this is the time when I ask people, to encourage them to come up. You're still welcome to come up. I know a lot of people maybe will shy away from that this year, and that's okay. But again, please keep in contact with us. All of our emails is firstname.lastname@legis.iowa.gov. That's probably the best way in and out of session to keep in contact with us. Thank you to Ken and Ginger and Oski News and all the other sponsors and supporters of this. I think all of us can say that we look forward to next year when we can do this back in person. Thank you.
So we're going to wrap this up. It's been an interesting hour and I think very informative. Once again, we'd like to thank the Mahaska Chamber and Development Group, my friend Joe Millage from KIIC for allowing me to do these crazy things in here inside our studio here inside of Penn Central Mall. Andy and Allison McGuire for their work back helping feed questions to us. Midwest One and Smoky Row for the coffee. The smell of coffee in the office was really welcome. Helps bring back those normal Saturday morning memories. So this has been broadcast live on the Mahaska Chamber and Development Group's Facebook page, Oskaloosa News, and will be on MCG Channel 7. The next time that we come about, we'll have the city and county, and that will be on, let me look it up real quick here, and we will be on February 13th, starting at 8:30 a.m., and it will feature, once again, city and county representatives. We'll have this group of legislators back on February 27th. There'll probably be a lot of water flowing under the bridge by that point in time, so we'll have a lot more questions and looking for some clarity. So I'm Ken Alsop. I'm with Oskaloosa News, and I want to thank everybody for joining in today. We look forward to seeing you on February 13th.